Good evening. Sincerely apologies for our delay in the starting program. We had technical problems. Today we want to pay tribute to one of our most outstanding revolutionary stalwart, Comrade Moses Mawani Kotane, not what many people have written, particularly in Wikipedia and others, as Maune, Kim Mawan. It's important that as we start paying tribute to this stalwart of our movement, we also recognize the challenges that we face as humanity, as a revolution, and what Comrade Moses Kotane stood for. Appreciating that this was a legendary revolutionary of the South African Revolution, a patriot, an internationalist, and above all, a trade unionist and a communist. Let me start by expressing our revolutionary greetings, first to the Moses Kotane family, to Mary Becca Kotane, our special blessing that we still have you in our midst, and to the chairman of the Moses Kotane Foundation, Comrade Joe Kotane, the son of Comrade Moses Kotane, as well as other members of the family, Comrade Sam, and all of them. Let me also greet the leadership of the Moses Kotane Foundation in general, especially the CEO, Comrade Steve Mashia, for his commitment to the legacy of our stalwart. Today we'll just want to reflect few points regarding the life of Comrade Kotane in the context of South African situation. We'll highlight the challenges faced by our country and the world through COVID-19 and how to preserve and protect life, and making sure that distance during this period is characterized as love. We also want to deepen the fight against neoliberal capitalist economy and expose its failures to resolve the social challenges facing humanity as a whole. And of course, on its space to build an enduring public-led, public interest economy. We also need to make sure that we all come together during this period to fight and win the right to work for all people, and in fact deepen or elevate the contradictions of the capitalist system that is in crisis. We'll equally highlight briefly what we think are immediate challenges regarding the role of the financial sector in our country. The greedy financial capitalist economy that is now overpowering other sectors of the economy and financializing not only our economy in South Africa, but world economy as a whole. And in that regard, the role of the South African Reserve Bank becomes critical in playing an important progressive role that can build the economy, not just focus on inflation targeting. Particularly, for instance, we have highlighted issues regarding the South African Reserve Bank possibility of buying bonds and even buying some of the key debt, like the debt of Eskom, for instance. These are some of the questions that we'll deal with, including how to support our health and education system, given that we are an autonomous country that is able to produce our own currency. We'll touch on few international questions, the situation in the US, the crisis that has befell the people of Palestine imposed by apartheid Israel, as well as to challenge the hegemon of the US capitalist system worldwide, particularly as it relates to Cuba, Venezuela, Syria, as well as to address our own continent, the Western Sahara crisis that continues because of occupation by Morocco, the problem of lack of democracy in Swaziland, the stealing of elections in other countries, for instance, the Congo, where a man who received less than 20% of the vote is president, and other parts of the continent. In this way, we think we can characterize and locate in the main the key areas of the role of Comrade Malumi Moses Kotane in our revolution. As we all know, Comrade Kotane comes from Mapaila in the northwest, and he joined the Communist Party at a young age. And in his role in the party, when he was also a trade unionist, participated in the night schools of the SACP. This is part of the old night schools of the SACP. They will come in different forms. And we call on our structures across the board to literally embrace these night schools. I think it's also important, as I continue to highlight these factors, particularly regarding the night school, to say this should go across all our movement. Comrade Moses Kotane played a major role in the Communist Party. Born in 1905, by 1929, he was a member of the Communist Party. And by 1939, was already its general secretary. And he will go on to play a major role in our liberation struggle and became one of our core strategists and thinkers. He made major interventions, for instance, when the party was faced with a crisis after the adoption of the National Democratic Revolution as a framework that was adopted through collaboration with the Comintern, the Communist International, that was looking at the situation of liberation struggles in the colonies. That is, countries that were occupied by imperialist forces, and in our case, by Imperial Britain. You will pen the Craddock letter that became symbolic in how to ground or how to apply materialistic conditions to your own issues, so that the Communist Party at the time, he argued, was focusing on the developments in Europe. He had intervened to make sure that the Communist Party is able to focus on the conditions in South Africa. This is critical today as a dialectical method, that the primary theater of struggle is in our communities, where our cadres are, where our members are, where the people are living. That's where we need to sharpen class struggle and class contradictions and elevate people-centered, people-based interventions. The Craddock letter intervention was very critical in the Communist Party, in that it allowed the Communist Party to rebuild itself anew, and by the time he took over as General Secretary, he went on to build one of the strongest Communist Party organization. In fact, at the time, in the 1940s, the Communist Party became the strongest political formation that also shook right at the belly of the Nationalist Party. So much that when it came into power in 1948, one of the first organizations that they sought to ban as a nationalist party was the South African Communist Party. They did that so that they could stop the influence that the Communist Party was having in our society. They banned the Communist Party through the Suppression of Communism Act of 1915 April, and went on to outlaw the concept of communism itself, but not without a struggle. There was a massive struggle, including in parliament. Some of our comrades who were then parliamentarians, like Comrade Brian Banton, Comrade Khan, fought very hard. In fact, they filibustered the Communist Manifesto in parliament, although later on the apartheid government tried to contaminate those records of the Communist Manifesto in Parliament, which was written in Afrikaans. And I think in tribute of Comrade Moses Kotane and his Creddoc letter, we should also call our movement as a whole and endorse the support for the Creddoc 4 families on their necessity and the need for the prosecution of those who murdered our comrades, the Creddoc 4. We want the government to take up this matter and support and give political as well as financial and moral support to the families and ensuring that they are able to get justice. Creddoc was very important. We had a program there early this year led by our General Secretary, Comrade Nzimande, Comrade Alex, who has joined us in this program as well. In that program, for instance, we know we still need to unveil the party flag that during the funeral of the Creddoc 4 was unfurled by our comrades at the funeral, shocking the apartheid regime, because it was the first time since the burning of the Communist Party that our flag was openly hoisted by our masses. The 1940s became the golden decade of the strength and growth of the Communist Party. But after its burning by the apartheid regime 1950, the Communist Party reconstituted underground from Communist Party of South Africa to the South African Communist Party in 1953, and soon thereafter launched itself through the African Communist, which sought to embrace the broad African revolution and contributed immensely from then onwards into the processes towards the Freedom Charter. And if you read some of Comrade Kotane's interviews during that time, you will appreciate that he had carried particularly the economic sections of the Freedom Charter, the gist of what the reconstitution of the Communist Party and its congresses underground were able to project for our revolution. Thereafter, the Communist Party itself, now underground, went on to participate immensely and effectively in the mass defiance leading to the 1960s armed struggle after Sharpeville. That is the Sharpeville massacre. And Comrade Kotane and others then left the country into exile. They led a selfless life for our people in the fight against apartheid and for our freedom. It is important, comrade, that we also appreciate Comrade Kotane and his work amongst the masses. One of his biggest strengths was his ability to interface with the masses and his honesty to engage with the masses earned him so much respect, such that even during the dangerous night in Alexander, where he was staying, Comrade Kotane survived and wiggled himself and was protected by the masses. You'll be surprised that even the gangsters in Alex, they will pave the way every time he was coming back from his programs during the night going home. And they will agree this is a man to protect, because they knew to touch him, they would have touched the entire community. His ideas and stature were hegemon. That also were his ideas and stature and those of the Communist Party in our movement as a whole. He immensely contributed in the building and consolidation of our revolutionary alliance. We henceforth call him the architect or the chief architect of our revolutionary alliance. He worked in the trade unions in SACP, in the World Federation of Trade Unions. He worked in the African National Congress, became its Treasurer General, and made sure that the ANC always took into account the interest of the Communist Party in the execution of its struggle. But not only that, to appreciate the interrelationship between the race, class, and the gender question. That is, the struggle to end national oppression, the struggle and to create a non-racial South Africa, as well as the struggle to end patriarchy and create a non-sexist South Africa, as well as the struggle to end class exploitation and create an egalitarian society, which paves the way towards socialism. He was very instrumental on articulating the national question. And Comrade Brian Banton, who wrote the book Moses Kotane, the South African Revolutionary, articulate these matters quite well regarding how Comrade Kotane was able to articulate the national question. So if you like, to understand Comrade Kotane proper, we need to clearly grasp the National Democratic Revolution and its tenets. All of this and their relationship to socialism. That is, the consistency to resolve the national question, the gender question, and the class question. And all of this, in our case, are linked with capitalist exploitation and political class oppression of society through the capitalist system, even when it was under apartheid. Therefore, the necessity to overthrow capitalism is an integral part of our struggle for the National Democratic Revolution. Without doing that, the system of social reproduction will remain driven at the behest and interest of the capitalist forces. At the same time, it is important to highlight one of the issues which Comrade Kotane grasped quite clearly, which was an issue raised by the Young Communist League at that time, when Comrade Silwana, as well as Ruth First, had attended the party third Congress. And they had posed a question to the Communist Party, which Comrade Kotane went on to grapple with. This question was about how the Communist Party is seen by the people. I quote Comrade Silwana in this regard. He says, "The Communist Party has got to prove to the people that it is different. The natives look upon the whites as one class, their enemy." Close quote. This was the message at the party third Congress in 1924 by Comrade Silwana. Kotane, in his later years, preoccupied himself with this, and that is why he was able to ground the party to the realities of South Africa. And of course, he went on to play and to build a strong organization that today remains his legacy. But Comrade Kotane did that because he believed in a system, the system that sought to liberate humanity from all forms of evil and exploitation. And he embraced Marxism, what today we call Marxism-Leninism, which articulates the combination or the practice, the theory and practice or the praxis that seeks to end all forms of exploitation of a human being by another, and to end all class and racial inequalities, to end hunger, to end homelessness, to fight and defeat disease, and to share the value of education to all the people for the benefit of humanity. This Comrade Kotane fused it very well as a patriot with the liberation theory of our national struggle of the oppressed people, led by the African National Congress. In this case, to fight against a white minority regime. He embraced fully class struggle. He used that as an integral aspect of analysis, as its prism, to look into the gender crisis, to look into the national crisis, exploitation of the capitalist system on the African majority. And today, society is still faced with similar challenges and problems. It is therefore important that in pursuit of a free society, that is, society free of capitalist greed and exploitation, that is free of capitalist abrogation of wealth of society into communities, that we must be able to highlight and elevate the whole notion of Marxism. That Marxism itself, as a political theory of the working class, it is not just a theory of pleasure. It's a theory of action that should jack all people into action to change their living conditions. And this is what Comrade Kotane would have wanted across the board. And therefore, in articulating Marxism as a theory of struggle, it is important to locate it to the existing material condition of our people today in the midst of COVID-19. We have highlighted, for instance, key issues that we felt will require our immediate attention. One of those is that COVID-19 is ushering in a new economy, or a possibility for a new economy. It has exposed the crisis of the capitalist system and its inability to provide for the many people, that it is only concerned with elevating a few that is able to enrich at the expense of the majority. In this regard, a critique of the capitalist system should be sustained by all communists, including by progressive governments to date. We have seen, for instance, our government expressing and even announcing stimulus packages, basically to stabilize the economy. That process should be contested by the working class, because if we do not do that, the capitalist class will be the main beneficiary of this intervention by government. Basically, public debt would have been used to enrich and actually save a system that is so greedy and selfish, the capitalist system, that has no concern for the majority of people who would have contributed the same resources that has saved this system. In other words, we have to use this moment to ensure that we do not go back to the crisis before the crisis. That is, we do not go back to the economic crisis before COVID-19, because South Africa was already in a crisis by then. It is therefore critical that our interventions, both in the stimulus packages and other methods, are meant to change how we do things. For instance, many people have articulated that the part of the new economy will also be the use of technologies. The fourth industrial revolution, so-called. I think this is from Davos by Schwab. But because it's been used in that form, we use differently in the Communist Party. I'll use that language so for broader understanding. We can just say here that technology left in the hands of the capitalist will widen the gaps of inequality and poverty amongst the people worldwide. Therefore, government must fight to control that space on behalf of the public. We have already seen that the world's richest person, Jeff Bezos, has already gained no less than $10 billion US in just 2 months when the world was in crisis. The guy that created Zoom has already gained 8 billion rands, $8 billion US, just in the last 2 months. So technological instruments are creating a much more wider gap. The top 10 billionaires in the world have gained over 250 billion US dollars during the period of COVID crisis since March in the main. This shows how technology can go wrong if it's left only in the hands of a minority few, the capitalist. That is why, as part of that intervention, we need to guard, as South Africans, the public ownership and control of our spectrum, which is going to control data provision to our people, particularly as now the economy, as we get into the deep into the fourth industrial revolution, will need to use gadgets to do certain things. If we are to roll out, which we are calling for, a free Wi-Fi for society, you cannot do that if you have privatized your spectrum. The capitalists will use that to enrich themselves and to make more money. They will not allow the masses to have access to that kind of data for their self-enrichment. So it is therefore critical that this aspect of the spectrum and data provision, it's fully contested and not allowed to go to the ownership of private individuals. Therefore, the aspect of mobilizing all of society, particularly young people, to fight for the right to work, and all those who do not work, will require a full government change from just implementing alleviative mechanism that saves capital instead of transforming the economy and building and creating a new social order. The period today requires a new social order. We have seen how government, for instance, have functioned under disaster management. We want the approach to work under disaster management, the efficiency, the level of response to crisis, to be the new normal in our country. That way we can respond to the challenges facing our communities and use all available resources effectively. We also want to indicate, comrades, that there are serious problems internationally. That Comrade Kotane, as an internationalist, would have added his voice. As you know, he fell in Moscow, where he was initially buried. He was later brought back home and interred here at home in 2015. As an internationalist who also contributed immensely to the development of world communist thought, if you read, for instance, the writings of Comrade Dmitry, who was president of the Communist International, when he was faced with the challenges of the Communist International, he writes in his note that he had to consult two most trustworthy communists that he knew will give him an independent opinion of no self-interest, except of the communist movement. Interestingly, these two individuals were both South African and South African communist. Malume Moses Kotane and Malume J.B. Marx. That's how Comrade Kotane influenced even the world communist thought. Of course, he didn't go about boasting about this influence. That's why he remained humble. But in the international sphere, it's important to highlight currently the deep crisis that has befell the world's most arrogant state, the USA, which is currently practicing institutionalized racism that has been rejected wholly even by the Americans themselves, in their majority, who have gone out in all cities of the USA to protest against the unjust institutionalized racial system in the US, particularly expressed through police brutality and pronouncement by President Donald Trump. We must add our voice in the condemnation in the strongest terms possible of the apartheid America, how it cheapens black lives, and also condemn any form of racism and bigotry anywhere else in the world, and fully express our solidarity with the family of George Floyd in America and all black Americans and black people everywhere who are suffering racism, prejudice, and racial segregation, and indeed to everyone that is subjected to racism. We condemn racism everywhere, and we are joining the alliance tomorrow, our Revolutionary Alliance here at home, as we launch a campaign against racism. But we must appreciate, comrades, that during this difficult period, we must affirm our humanity and not practice reverse racism or reprisals. And it is during this period that we must call for unity and common action to reject racism with the contempt that it deserves, particularly when it takes place even here. The same outrage that we must express in America when racism takes place, whether it's from the police and other quarters, including from Donald Trump as president, we should be able to do so here at home against all racists, including the recent racial attack on Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, precisely because of her work in government. She gets targeted and highly attacked by a racist. We need to support the court action that is taken by the ANC Youth League in the Western Cape against that racist, and deal with any other racist that rears their heads. It is in this regard that we have also been assured and comforted by the majority of white Americans and many white people worldwide who have come out in solidarity with George Floyd's family, with the Black Lives Matter movement. It is very important that that movement must be sustained to once and for all end racism. And South Africa, as a country that benefited immensely from international solidarity in our struggle against racism and for our freedom, we should be able to occupy our role in the League of Nations to make sure that we are able to assert ourselves. And we call for common action in this regard. The Alliance leadership will tomorrow announce a comprehensive program that should be sustained beyond the period that it would have been outlined to fight against racism. But we must also outline, the comrades, that the sources of racism and racial bigotry is largely entrenched in the capitalist system. But from the US, we can see how this system, for instance, have unleashed its brutal instruments against the people, especially black Americans. We have seen the brutality of the police against protesters and African Americans who are just walking on the streets, who are killed for no reason whatsoever. Not that we'll accept any reason to kill anybody. The brutality of the police against journalists, for instance. The brutality of the American police and the system there against truth, against democracy, against liberty and freedoms. These are the values that America has all along been praising itself for. Now, a disgusting shame has befell America. We must save the soul of the majority of American people who believe in liberty, peace, and justice, and prosperity for all. But the capitalist illusion has now faded, and its monolithism in America has become a big illusion. Now the people can see what a capitalist system is indeed about. This crisis that we are faced with, including the crisis of COVID-19, is primarily and principally the crisis caused by the capitalist system. Of course, this crisis, it's now losing the system its worldwide hegemony. It has dismally failed the world, and we need a new system. One may be tempted to also say democracy has outgrown the existing state system, that is the existing capitalist state system. So we need a new social order and a new world economic order. And that we need immediately. And that is why we cannot allow all our interventions to be interventions that seek to save the system that has not been concerned about the majority of the people. This system is riddled with crisis, inherent crisis, and its operational mode is done so, that crisis is done so at the expense of the majority. It is destroying the environment, it is destroying nature, upon which all humanity survives. So we have to restore ourselves and have a system that can make sure that humanity can survive long on this planet Earth. And I think that all these attempts of science to explore the space for possible habitation should be commended. But it should not be taken so far as to think that we must just destroy the earth as is, because we have only one earth. So the protection of the environment is very, very critical. And we can see and indicate that scientists have indicated that this crisis that we face today, COVID-19, was not unpredicted. We have known that we will be befallen by such a crisis because of our pillaging of the environment through the capitalist production system. It is therefore critical that in memory of Comrade Moses Kotane, we reconnect with nature, we protect our environment, and we ensure that all human beings should use our nature to create their livelihoods, to meet their basic needs, to have quality lives, have nutritious food, for instance, decent shelter and housing, sanitation, health and education, and other basic necessities for humanity. It is therefore critical that as we do so, we must also pledge solidarity with all other people who have been living in crisis, self-imposed by the capitalist hegemon, particularly the US and Israel counterparts, in particular in Palestine, where the Palestinian people are subjected to all forms of different kinds of apartheid, removed from their land. The anniversary of the great disaster that befell the Palestinian people, the Nakba. We must stand in solidarity with the people of Palestine and condemn all maneuvers by Israeli government and Benjamin Netanyahu, who's trying to block all their exits, including at the moment the only exit that they are able to control through Jordan. They are occupying all Palestinian land. This matter must occupy us all the time as revolutionaries. Moses Kotane would have loved us, literally, to actively take part in the protection of the Palestinian struggle and the Palestinian people from harassment and intimidation and attack and killings by Israeli government. Israeli government has made lives of Palestinian children unbearable, arrested thousands of young children, put them in jail and denied them even parental visits. This must be condemned in the strongest terms possible. But we need action as a revolutionary movement. We need to mobilize society the same way that the Black Lives Matter have now mobilized almost the entire world. The Palestinian question must occupy us the same way. We must defeat this arrogance of Israeli state on the occupation of Palestinian land. We must also fight for the protection of the people of Syria from attacks, launched largely with the support of the American government, which has accepted its involvement. It doesn't hide this fact. So it's important that our internationalist program must respond to all of these matters. Our youth movement and the student movement, given their energy and youthfulness, of course our movement as a whole, should take up this matter quite strongly. Lastly, comrades, is just to indicate that this moment that we are in has got some dangers as well. One of the major dangers is that this moment may be stolen by the capitalist forces. Particularly South African capital has proven itself that it is not only stealing this moment, we seem to be unable to stop them from stealing this moment. So we need remobilization to ensure that finance capital and South African capital primarily doesn't steal the COVID crisis in order to strengthen itself and takes us back to the crisis that we have lived in for many years, despite political freedom. It is therefore critical that we should take ourselves out of the status quo. One of the dangers again is that we can reinforce a neoliberal capitalist trajectory instead of transitioning to a new social order, which is non-capitalist in path and development. And therefore, the strategic intervention of the state becomes critical, particularly the strategic use of our SOEs, including in aviation, which will remain a core mode of transport of goods and services worldwide. If we're going to be a country that is building its manufacturing capabilities, we definitely will require an efficient aviation system. Of course, I've highlighted the issue of guarding with all our might our national spectrum so that it is not stolen. This is one of the dangers of the moment, that if we look the other way and not concentrate on these other things, the spectrum, by the time we wake up, it will be gone and stolen. And by the time we need it most, we'll be unable to use it for interventions in our economy. In that way, I think we can try and give tribute to Comrade Moses Kotane. But we must also perhaps invoke what Comrade Fidel Castro indicated, that it is during the period of great crisis that we create great solutions. We need now to use this moment, to use this crisis, to come with great solutions to benefit all our people. In this regard, we can pay great tribute to Ndate Moses Kotane, the revolutionary legend of our South African Revolution, the chief architect of our revolutionary alliance, the unassuming uncle, the most trustworthy of our revolutionary, Comrade Moses Kotane. I think it will be important that we pay appropriate respect and memorial to Comrade Moses Kotane, who remains perhaps one of the most underrated South African revolutionaries, particularly in paying tribute, because Comrade Kotane led with many key leaders of our movement, and all of them without exception talk glowingly about him and how they value his contributions. His monument in the Northwest should remain open as a monument of education, as a monument of the values of our movement, encapsulated primarily in the Freedom Charter and many other important documents of our movement, including the Morogoro Conference, which unfortunately happened when he was already ill in hospital. But he contributed immensely in the development of political thought in our country and internationally. He remains a symbol of what communism is about and what a communist is. That measurement remains important. It should not be an archaical monument. It should be a symbol to say this is what our value system as communists, South African communists are, and this longest serving General Secretary of the South African Communist Party, Comrade Moses Kotane, from 1939 to 1978, who led with absolute example, should say to us, here was a special revolutionary. Let's properly celebrate him. Let him be known by all our young people, his major contribution to our society. To him and his peers, O.R. Tambo and others that he later on led with, Chief Lutuli, who was his primary peer and his confidant, who shared many strategic interventions in our movement, including on how they process the execution of armed struggle. We must say, you have left an indelible mark that cannot be erased in the memory of our liberation struggle, in the future of our society, and that your value system, your example, remains with us. It is with these few words that we want to say thank you, Comrade Moses Kotane, for your great life, that you lived entirely for the people, not for yourself. This remains our greatest example. Long live the undying spirit of Malume Moses Mawan Kotane. Long live. Forward to socialism, forward. Down with capitalism, down. Amandla. Thank you, comrades.